They were already silent when I found them. I wasn't looking for anything that morning, not hope, not trouble, and certainly not a reason to reopen the part of me I'd buried 6 feet deep. But the desert doesn't care what you're looking for. It shows you what you need to see. That's when I saw it, a wagon torn and listing to one side like a broken rib cage, half swallowed by sand, and lying beside it, 6 small bodies, motionless under the merciless Nevada sun. The oldest, a girl, maybe 14, had her arms wrapped around a younger child like she could still shield him from death. Her lips were cracked and bloodless, whispering something I couldn't hear. The youngest, a boy no older than 4, was completely still. No sobbing, no sound. Just silence. The kind of silence that screams louder than any cry. I didn't want to get closer. I wanted to turn my horse around and forget it ever happened. But my hands betrayed me, pulling the reins forward inch by inch, until I was close enough to see that one of the children was still blinking. Barely. I dismounted, slow boots sinking into the sand. My canteen was half empty, not enough for one of them, let alone all 6. And still, that girl reached for me. Her voice dry as dust, her words barely a breath. Please, help them. It hit me harder than any bullet ever could. Because 5 years ago, I'd held my own son as he bled out in my arms. Back then, I swore I'd never care again. But now, looking down at that child, all ribs and dust and desperation, I realized something. My heart hadn't died. It had just been waiting for a reason to beat again. Once I had a family too, I wasn't always like this. There was a time when I laughed. When my husband Luke would sing to me by the fire after supper, and our boy Thomas would run wild in the tall grass behind the barn, chasing dust devils and dreams. We had a modest ranch tucked near a stream in Red Hollow. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. It smelled of fresh timber morning coffee, and the kind of hope you only feel when life still feels endless. Then the war came close. Not the kind with flags and bugles, the kind that creeps through shadows. One morning, I rode out to check the fencing. By noon, the smoke from our house could be seen for miles. I found what was left of them, and nothing of me. They said it was raiders, Apache, most likely, though. I never knew for sure. Folks in town offered me a cot, a plate of food, a kind word. I didn't take any of it. Instead, I rode west with nothing but a rifle and a grief so sharp it could carve bone. I found a patch of hard land, far enough from town that no one came knocking. Built a shack with my own hands, dug a well, learned how to listen to the wind instead of voices. The desert doesn't pity you. It teaches you how to live without needing anything, especially not people. Over the years, I watched men try to take that, land ranchers who wanted the water beneath it, lawmen who wanted a woman properly settled, even drifters who thought loneliness made me soft. They all learned otherwise. So when I spotted that broken wagon and those dying children, my first instinct was exactly what you'd expect. Walk away. Stay safe. Don't let other people's pain become your own. But instinct doesn't always win. It was her eyes that did it. The oldest girl? She couldn't have been more than 14, but her gaze held something far older. A quiet fire, the kind of strength that refuses to die, even when the body's nearly given up. She looked at me the way I used to look at Luke right before he'd ride out that unspoken plea to come back safe, to not let go. And I couldn't. I crouched down beside her, opened my canteen, and let the water touch her lips. She drank like her life depended on it, because it did. Then she grabbed my wrist, pointed to the others, and managed one more word. First, them. Even in the face of death, she was trying to save someone else. That's when I knew this wasn't just an accident. It wasn't just another family lost to the desert. Something more had happened here. Their wagon didn't just break down. It had been turned over deliberately. Supplies scattered like someone had looted them. And one of the children, a boy around 10, had bruises that didn't come from sun or heat. This was no tragedy of nature. This was man-made. I stood heart-pounding eyes scanning the horizon. If whoever did this was still nearby, I didn't just find these kids. I walked straight into someone's unfinished business. Still, I couldn't leave. Because maybe I wasn't the woman I used to be. But maybe I wasn't done becoming someone new. Gunmen came before I could save them. I was just about to lift the second child when I heard it hoofbeats. Low and fast. Not the kind that wander, the kind that hunt. My spine stiffened. I turned slow hand, drifting toward the rifle on my saddle. 3 riders came over the ridge in a line like shadows pulled from the earth. Faces wrapped in bandanas, hats pulled low. The lead man rode a tall black gelding, and his eyes, even at 30 feet, I could feel them. Cold, calculating. They didn't call out, didn't raise a hand. Just fanned out around me like wolves circling a carcass. The leader finally spoke. His voice was coarse like dry rope dragged through grit. Well, what do we have here, a desert angel playing nursemaid to some strays? I said nothing. My body stayed still, but every nerve was screaming. Funny thing, he continued nudging his horse closer, finding a woman out here with 6 little ones all alone. Real convenient. The girl, the oldest, stirred at the sound. Her head lifted barely, and her arm instinctively reached toward the youngest boy beside her. Her body said what her lips couldn't. Don't touch them. Easy now, I said, lifting one hand slowly while keeping the other near my canteen. They're dehydrated, nearly dead. I've got some water, some supplies. Supplies. The second rider chuckled, a twitchy man with darting eyes. Jack, you hear that? She thinks we came for bandages and biscuits. They laughed. But it wasn't a sound meant for amusement. It was meant for power, for dominance. Jack, the leader, leaned in, his voice dropping low. Here's the thing, ma'am. This stretch of desert, it don't belong to the law. It belongs to the men who survive it. You're sitting on something valuable, water a wagon, 6 saleable souls. Ain't a bad haul for a Tuesday. That's when I knew. This wasn't a chance encounter. They'd been tracking the wagon, maybe even caused the wreck. And now I was just extra. My fingers itched toward the rifle, but I was too exposed, crouched in open sand, no cover. 6 children too weak to run. Even if I fired first, I wouldn't be the last to shoot. And then, as if the devil himself wanted in on the deal, another sound cut through the dry air. A 4th rider. He came from the east, slow and steady, with the casual confidence of someone who knew no one would dare challenge him. He wore a star, a tarnished tin badge glinting from his dusty coat. Territorial marshal. But I didn't feel relief. No, I felt the sharp, cold spike of dread in my throat. Marshal Clyde Maddox. I knew that name. Everyone did. From Elko to Tucson, he was known not for justice, but for turning law into leverage. A man who made criminals disappear, if the price was right. He stopped 10 yards away, tipped his hat like we were old friends sharing tea. Miss Harland, he drawled with mock courtesy. Fancy seeing you out here in such sensitive company. He glanced at the children, then at the riders flanking me. He knew. He'd orchestrated it. The kids were bait, and I had stepped into the trap. The youngest boy whimpered faintly in his sleep, just a twitch, a soft breath, but it broke me. I stepped between the children and the men, planting my boots in the dust. You're not taking them. Maddox raised a brow. I admire your fire, Willa, but you're standing in the middle of nowhere alone with half a canteen and no backup. That's not fire, sweetheart. That's suicide. The nervous rider's hand shifted near his holster, and I realized. The wind was changing, the sky was shifting, and the desert was about to choose sides. But they weren't alone. Just when I thought I'd measured every angle, every shot, every chance, The desert gave me something I didn't expect. A voice, sharp, echoing, foreign. It cut through the tension like a blade. Then 5 figures rose from the ridge above us, shadows with painted faces, weapons glinting in the sun, and eyes like burning coal. Apache warriors. They hadn't just wandered in. They'd been watching. The man in front, taller than the others, broad-shouldered with old battle scars across his chest, stepped forward. He didn't flinch, didn't raise his weapon yet, just studied the scene like a man taking inventory of lives and deciding which ones to end. The men around me froze. Jack cursed under his breath. The twitchy rider's hand dropped from his holster like it had been burned. Maddox didn't move, not even an inch, but his jaw twitched just once. He recognized the lead warrior, too. So did I. His name was Talon. 5 years ago, when my ranch was burned and my family was lost, it was him, this man, who found me crawling through ash, bleeding, broken. He could have ended me then. Should have. But he didn't. Instead, he looked at the locket around my neck, the one with Thomas's picture inside, and said something in Apache I couldn't understand. Then he vanished into the smoke. Now here he was again, older, sterner, but unmistakably the same. He pointed at me and spoke in English this time, voice low and deliberate. Woman with dead son's memory. You should not be here. With tin star men who steal children. Maddox opened his mouth to object, but Talon raised a hand. His warriors took positions like clockwork, silent, fast, efficient. Within seconds, they'd boxed in the entire clearing from above. Every rifle was aimed, not just at Maddox and his men, but at all of us. I stepped forward, heart pounding. I didn't bring them, I said. I was trying to help the children. He didn't answer. Just looked at the wagon. The 6 barely breathing little bodies. The bruises. The torn shoes. The way Emma, the eldest, tried to move her body between the men and her siblings even now. Talon's eyes flickered. He understood. Then Emma spoke a whisper, but strong enough to carry. My name is Emma. These are my brothers and sisters. Our parents died 3 days ago. The wagon broke. We tried to walk, but she trailed off, then lifted her head toward me. This lady, she's the first person who stopped to help. Something in her voice, in her posture, that fierce protectiveness, struck a chord in Talon. Apache culture reveres strength, especially in the face of death. And here was a child's skin, blistered from sun lips, cracked from thirst, still fighting to protect someone else. He tilted his head, then glanced toward the nervous rider, the one who'd been eyeing his holster since they arrived. Talon spoke with no rise in tone, no shouting, just quiet bone-deep authority. Move that hand 1 more inch, Tin Man, and the buzzards will eat your eyes. The man's hand stopped. His face turned white. Maddox cleared his throat, tried to puff up his chest. I'm a territorial marshal, he said. Attacking me is an act of war. Talon laughed, not a hearty laugh, not amused, a cold laugh. The kind that precedes bloodshed. Your government means nothing on this land. Your badge is tin. Our land is bone and blood. And then, the youngest child, the little boy who hadn't made a sound in hours, let out a long, choking breath. Then went limp. Emma screamed. It wasn't loud. It was raw. The kind of scream that tears something open in the heart of anyone who's ever loved a child. I dropped to my knees beside him, fingers reaching for his tiny pulse. It was still there. Barely. Talon stepped forward. He didn't ask. He didn't wait. He reached down and lifted the boy into his arms, cradling him against his chest, like he was his own blood. Then he turned to one of his warriors and barked something in Apache. 2 men sprang into motion, pulling down spears and cloaks, building a stretcher out of nothing but instinct and experience. They weren't just raiders. They were soldiers. And they were choosing to save, not to kill. I looked up at Talon. For a moment, the world went still, just sun, sweat, wind, and choices. He looked at me and said, "Children matter more than war. You will lead, we will carry. Go." And like that, the fight changed. The desert had chosen. The desert asked me who I was. The boy was still breathing just barely in Talon's arms. The other children were stirring now, blinking against the sun, too weak to move, but alive. And yet, none of us moved, because the real danger hadn't passed. It stood before us in the form of 4 armed men, now surrounded, outnumbered, and very, very desperate. Talon's warriors flanked the ridge, weapons ready. All they needed was a word, a nod. Even silence would do. But Talon waited. For me. He turned toward me slowly, as if weighing something ancient in his hands. "These men," he said, gesturing toward Maddox and the others, "would have sold your children like cattle. They wanted your blood on desert stone. We can end them now. They deserve no mercy." I looked at Jack, the leader. His face was hard, but the cocky edge was gone. His hand twitched near his belt, but not toward his gun. Just searching for something to hold on to. Maddox, for once, didn't speak, didn't smirk. He looked at me like he was trying to guess which way the wind would blow and if I would be the one to pull the trigger. My hands clenched at my sides. My mind went back to that burning day 5 years ago. My husband's body crumpled in our yard. My son's tiny boots still by the door. Talon had spared me then. Not out of kindness, out of choice. Now the same choice was mine. Vengeance or mercy. My breath caught. I felt Emma's eyes on me, and I turned. She had crawled closer, dragging herself across the sand despite the pain. Her arms were wrapped around her little sister, who now lay limp and fevered in the heat. Emma's voice was hoarse but steady. "She's not breathing. Please, help her." And then, softer, so soft I almost missed it. "She's not like them." I blinked. At first, I thought she meant her sister. But then I realized she meant me. She was defending me, even in her grief, even in her weakness. She saw something I'd stopped believing I had. A heart. I stepped forward. Slow, deliberate. My boots sank into the sand with every step until I stood between Maddox and Talon. Between old hate and the fragile thread of something new. "No," I said. Talon raised an eyebrow. "No, they don't die today," I said, my voice firmer. "Not here. Not now. I won't let my story or theirs end with more blood." Talon's face was unreadable. He looked at me long and hard, and I could almost hear the memories turning in his mind. Smoke, fire, the locket, my broken body crawling through ash. And now this. "You would let them live?" he asked, his voice low with disbelief. "I'm not saying they don't deserve to face what they've done," I replied. "But not like this. Not in front of children. Not in the name of survival." Silence fell again. The desert waited. Then Talon nodded. Once. He turned to his warriors and barked something sharp, their rifles lowered, reluctant but obedient. "You live." He said his words like iron, because the woman you hunted chooses mercy. "You will ride north. You will never return. If I see your faces again, your blood will stain this land forever." Jack mounted fast, eyes still darting. The twitchy one was pale, trembling. Maddox lingered, one hand on the reins, the other on his badge. He opened his mouth, maybe to threaten, maybe to beg, but thought better of it. He rode after the others in silence. I watched them go, a cloud of dust trailing behind like a ghost, refusing to let go. When they were gone, the quiet fell again. But it wasn't the same. It wasn't the silence of death. It was the silence that comes just before healing. I turned toward the children, and my stomach dropped. Emma was crying again, not from fear, but panic. "She's not breathing," she whispered. "Sarah's not. She's not." I knelt beside the little girl, pressed my fingers to her throat. No pulse, no breath. The price of mercy had cost us seconds. Maybe too many. Talon was already moving. His warriors dropped their rifles and sprang into action. I watched helpless as he lifted the limp child in his arms, the same way he'd once carried me, and whispered something in his native tongue. He turned to me. We ride. Now. Or we bury her before sundown. And I nodded. No more speeches, no more choices, just the road ahead. We rode together for the children. We didn't have time for goodbyes. No time for prayer or plans or even fear. Just movement. Talon gave a sharp command in Apache, and his warriors scattered like wind across the sand. They moved fast, not with panic, but with purpose. These were men who'd ridden through war, carried wounded through fire, and now they moved with the same urgency. For children they didn't even know. They built a stretcher for little Sarah out of cloaks and carved spears. One warrior lifted her gently, as if she were made of paper and glass. Her skin was hot, her breath ragged and shallow, but it was there, barely. Emma climbed up behind me on my horse, refusing to let go of her sister's hand, as Talon and the others mounted with the rest of the children. One warrior rode with a boy no older than 6, his arms tight around the child's waist, whispering something soft to keep him awake. We didn't look back. There was nothing behind us but death. Ahead, 8 miles of unforgiving desert. No trail, no windbreak. Just blistering sun and scattered shadows crawling along the red earth. I led the way. My ranch was small, but I knew every rock, every bend, every patch of ground where a hoof could slip. I didn't waste a word, didn't waste a breath. Emma spoke only once, her voice so faint I thought the wind had imagined it. She's still warm. She whispered, arms around her sister's shoulders. That means she's still here. Right, I couldn't answer. But I reached back and squeezed her hand. Behind me, the Apache riders kept a steady pace, never faltering, even as dust stung our eyes, and the heat rose in waves that bent the horizon. Halfway there, the boy who hadn't cried before started sobbing in short, broken bursts. It was the best sound I'd heard all day. It meant his body still had fight in it. One of the warriors handed him a wet cloth pressed gently to his lips. Another poured a few drops of water into a carved bowl, careful not to spill even a drop. Every ounce mattered, every heartbeat. I kept riding, jaw-clenched, pulse hammering. The sun was slipping lower now, a glowing red eye on the western edge. If it dropped before we got home, if the chill of desert night set in, we'd lose more than Sarah. And then at last, I saw it. The weathered outline of my ranch, small and crooked and stubborn as the woman who built it. The windmill spun lazily, the well still intact. A miracle in this part of Nevada. The moment we reached the yard, Talon barked new orders. In minutes, my porch was cleared, the doors flung wide, and the house filled with bodies moving like clockwork. The front room became a clinic, a battlefield, a sanctuary. I ran to the pantry, threw open the cabinets, yanked out every tin of herbs, every strip of cloth I'd saved. Talon's men helped without hesitation, holding children upright, feeding them sips of honey water, keeping them conscious. Sarah was the worst. Burning with fever, eyes rolled back, lips cracked to bleeding. Her tiny chest rose and fell like a bird caught in a storm, unpredictable, weak. Emma held her hand like it was the only thing keeping the child tethered to this world. I crushed feverfew leaves and willow bark, mixed them into a thick paste, added it to water cooled with damp cloths from the well. When I pressed it to Sarah's mouth, she didn't respond. "Come on, baby," I whispered, brushing the wet strands of hair from her forehead. "You've come this far. You don't get to give up now." Hours passed, maybe more. The desert night settled in cool, hushed stars, sharp as glass overhead. One by one, the other children began to stabilize, color returning to their cheeks, their breathing soft and even. Even the silent boy curled up next to a warrior's legs and fell into the first real sleep he'd had in days. Still, Sarah didn't move. Then just as I began to fear the worst, I heard it. A tiny sound. Not a word. Just a breath. But her lips parted. Emma leaned in, holding her breath, and Sarah, without opening her eyes, whispered one word. "Sister." Emma broke down, sobbing into her lap, her whole body trembling with release. I wrapped my arms around them both, and for the first time in years, I let the tears fall too. We hadn't saved all of them, but we'd saved enough. And for the first time since I buried my son, that was enough. Or as she called me, Mama. The sun rose quiet the next morning, not blazing, not cruel, just soft. Like it knew better than to shout. Inside the house, 6 children slept in borrowed blankets. Breathing slow, peaceful, alive. I moved quietly between them, checking foreheads, adjusting pillows. My back ached. My hands were raw. But I'd never felt more steady, more grounded, more needed. Emma was last. She stirred as I tucked the quilt higher over her shoulder. Her voice was husky from crying, but strong. "Thank you," she whispered. I didn't know what to say. So I just touched her cheek like I used to do with Thomas when he'd finally fall asleep after a storm. That's when I heard the footsteps on the porch. Not boots, moccasins. Talon stood in the doorway, silent as dawn. Behind him, his men had already saddled their horses. They moved with that same quiet efficiency warriors returning to the wind. He nodded once. "You have new children now," he said. "Guard them well." I stepped onto the porch as he turned to leave. "Talon," I said, voice catching. "Why? Why did you help him?" He paused, then looked back, eyes darker than nightfall. 5 winters ago, he said, I found you crawling from fire, clutching your dead child's picture. You did not scream. You did not beg. You just held on. That is warrior heart. He tapped his chest once. I do not forget warrior hearts. Then he rode away, disappearing into the open land like smoke. I watched until the last rider vanished over the ridge. The house was too quiet again, but this time it wasn't empty. A soft rustling behind me, then a small voice, fragile but certain. "Ma'am, can I call you Mama?" It was the smallest girl, the one who hadn't spoken since the desert. I turned. She stood barefoot, holding the hem of her dress, eyes wide with something I hadn't seen in years. Trust. And in that moment I felt it. Not grief, not fear. Home. I knelt down, opened my arms, and she ran into them like she'd been mine all along. And if this story touched something in you, if you still believe in second chances, in mercy and healing, then stay with us. Because here in this corner of the Wild West, we don't just tell stories. We bring hearts back to life. Subscribe for more healing Wild West stories. We're just getting started.